Hello and welcome to another edition of Green TV. This is the Meet the Solutionary series where I find the best and the brightest people and practices to bring to you, the public, whether you're light green, dark green, or just curious, the most important, interesting, and compelling information and people. And we must talk about what's happened with the Supreme Court, most recently on EPA. People are still stunned from the abortion move, but while that is super important, if we don't have a planet that's habitable, even that won't matter. So really pleased to have with me Rick Wayman. He is the CEO of an organization called F4CR, which stands for Foundation for Climate Restoration. I think climate restoration is a really good term to use to start bringing into conversation. So welcome, Rick.
Thanks so much, Betsy. It's a pleasure to be here.
I invited you because you wrote an article that was right on and just talked about, the Supreme Court ruling, what it means, what it doesn't mean, could have been worse, could have been a lot better. And your perspective was quite thoughtful. And given your organization, Climate Restoration, obviously this was not a step forward.
Well, no, absolutely not. It certainly was not. And I guess to explain that a little bit, what we mean by climate restoration is bringing the levels of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere back to pre-industrial levels. So in the case of carbon dioxide, we're talking about under 300 parts per million. Around 280 is the level at which humans evolved, thrived for many centuries. So that's our goal, and we know that we need to go about doing that primarily through massive carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas removal processes. And so what the EPA ruling really means for us in that outlook is that if more emissions are going into the atmosphere today, tomorrow, next year, that's more that ultimately we're going to have to remove. So our approach and our belief is that the current emissions need to be cut back, they need to be regulated, they need to be eliminated. Absolutely. But we also right now need to focus on scaling up the technologies and the processes to remove that which we've already put in.
I want to talk about the technology, but you mentioned parts per million. 350 is considered the safe amount. And I think we're at 420, something like that right now. It's showing how far beyond we are.
Yeah. This is, I mean, 50% higher than that 280 level that I mentioned. So this is really unprecedented in human history for sure. This is a level of carbon dioxide that would be much more suited toward, let's say, the T-Rex than the human. So it's a big concern. We've got to take action.
I smile just because you mentioned dinosaurs. I talk about the dinosaurs among us who are, for some reason, not ashamed to show their face and say, climate change isn't a problem. I was just on News Nation last week in a debate with someone named Alex Epstein. I don't know if you know him, but he wrote a book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and has another one coming out about the bright future for coal, oil, and gas. I'm not kidding. And not to call him out, but maybe we should, because in mid-2022, as the planet feels like it's on fire, and that doesn't mean it's not really cold in some places, and he was on to talk about how wonderful the Supreme Court was to do this. And of course, I disagree. And we had a little 4-minute, back and forth, but it's not funny and it's not okay. I don't think that there are still people probably funded by the fossil fuel industry who are claiming that it's no problem and nothing to worry about and nothing need be done. His premise is that fossil fuels have done a lot more good than harm, and it's brought us to where we are. And nobody's saying fossil fuels are bad or that we should undo what we've done. That's not possible anyway. What we're saying is, okay, got us a long way, but now that we know the downside, the dark side, we need, and how quickly climate change has arrived, faster than even scientists predicted, we need to do everything we can to get off our gases. And so that kind of, misinformation, disinformation doesn't help, does it?
Well, it's beyond disappointing. I mean, that would be sugarcoating what it is. It's, in my opinion, disingenuous, but it's also just plain dangerous to pretend that we can go on the way that we've been going. I like to think a lot about practices that were prevalent in civilization centuries ago or millennia ago that we look at now and say, how could those people have possibly thought that was a good idea? That's barbaric. That's outrageous. At the time, some people thought it was great. Some people were benefiting from it in the short term. Now we know better. And with fossil fuels, now we know better. And now is the time that we've got to change our behavior, both as individuals, but more importantly, as society.
I think one of the reasons I get so angry at people like him, there aren't so many now who are, I don't know, arrogant enough to show their face on national television and say climate change is not a problem with a straight face. It's the people who are always hit first and worst, who are suffering in heat and drought. And what happened in India in March, I heard people's blood literally boiled. That's why I don't like the arrogance, because it's one thing to be in a air-conditioned apartment or home in the United States. It's quite another to be hit, as so many places, the Bahamas, by hurricanes, and China with flooding, biblical flooding. And every continent, every country has been hit by extreme weather. So to say that this is normal is just absurd, but it's dangerous too, because some people would like to know that there's no problem. Don't change your behavior, don't change your thinking, just carry on. And of course, we can't afford to have that mentality, pervade.
Sure. Yeah. And Betsy, you mentioned the many people around the world on the front lines that are dealing with the very catastrophic immediate effects of climate change. That's the reason why I got involved in becoming a climate advocate. Is in my previous work, which was working for the elimination of nuclear weapons. One of the things that I had the privilege of doing, working closely with the government of the Marshall Islands in some lawsuits that they had filed at the International Court of Justice against the 9 nuclear armed nations. Totally separate issue that had nothing to do with climate, except I got to know these people very well who I was working with. I would talk to them regularly, and I would hear what was happening to their homelands, the regular flooding, the fact that their islands are literally disappearing. And it may or may not, at this point, be too late to salvage that situation. But that's real. That's not the moderate inconvenience that I face here in Southern California when I have to evacuate my home because of an intense wildfire. That's awful, but it's ultimately an inconvenience. My house could be rebuilt, right? My friends in the Marshall Islands are no longer going to have their homelands to go back to, and that is just catastrophic and really unimaginable for most people. But that's what really tipped me into knowing that I had to do something to take action. This is real, and if we don't do it, it's not going to get better.
Didn't some residents of Marshall Islands get relocated to, was it Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana? I saw a story about that, and they were like, a whole new land and being trained for jobs. At least they had some government assistance, but the migration, the refugee crisis has already begun.
Sure, yeah, and that was, that's kind of a long entangled history with the U.S. around nuclear weapons testing that happened on the islands, which is another story of failure of humans to really think beyond the immediate. But anyway, yes, there are large communities of Marshallese, both economic and environmental refugees, who have left the islands for somewhere that they feel like they're going to be able to call home in a longer term.
You mentioned nuclear proliferation, and I know you're talking about weapons, but what about nuclear power as part of the solution to our crisis, the climate crisis, of course? Just wonder if you have an opinion, a strong opinion, or maybe like me, I go back and forth, because on the one hand, if it's not going to add to the emissions, we got to look at that. On the other hand, have they figured out what to do with the waste? And accidents do happen.
Sure, yeah, and those last 2 points are really key. We don't know what to do with the waste, frankly. And even if one accident happens, as we've seen, the consequences are just unimaginably long in terms of the scale. So my organization, the Foundation for Climate Restoration, we don't work specifically on energy transition issues. So we don't have a specific position on nuclear energy. The one thing I would say, though, is I think that continuing to rely on old ways of creating energy in kind of this macro grid capacity, it's just not it's not the direction that is sustainable, and it's not something that that it appears that we're going to be capable of doing as society. I think that there are many renewable options that are cheaper, that are faster, that are more scalable, and that's really what we're going to need to do in order to transition away from fossil fuels.
And what about another controversial area, legitimately, and that's technology, carbon sucking technology in particular? How viable and scalable are those methods? I know there's millions and millions of dollars going into experimenting, if you will, to try to find something that's going to work and be scalable. I mean, what an epic task that is. But is it going to have to be? Obviously, we have to reduce emissions. But do you think that is something we can actually count on? Is that technology being invented in a way that it can be beyond just here and there?
Right. So I definitely want to for your viewers, I want to distinguish between carbon capture and carbon dioxide removal. So carbon capture, if you envision a smokestack at a natural gas power plant, carbon capture would be capturing that exhaust before it goes into the atmosphere, right? And piping it underground or utilizing it in some other way. Carbon dioxide removal is a technology or a process to remove the CO2 that is already out in the atmosphere, sometimes what we call legacy carbon. So, again, we don't put any stock or really that much focus on carbon capture because we've got to transition away from fossil fuels. Maybe it's a little bit of a Band-Aid approach while the transition is happening, but ultimately that's not something that we're going to be able to rely on long term. We are focusing on carbon dioxide removal solutions and other greenhouse gases in addition to carbon dioxide. And the reason for that is there are 1 trillion tons of excess CO2 in the atmosphere right now. We've got to remove that. And, planting trees is one thing that you hear very often. Great solution. That's not going to be sufficient on its own. There are technologies that are being developed. One is called direct air capture. There are small scale plants operating around the world. One most notably is called the Orca plant in Iceland. And right now it's working, it's fine, but it's a very small scale and it's pretty expensive. Now that's the case with pretty much every technology, right? It starts out quite expensive and not that efficient. Think about computer chips 20 years ago versus now, right? Way less capable, way more expensive 20 years ago than right now. So to a certain extent, I think we are going to see that sort of development with direct air capture. And at this point, I think it's too early to say definitively whether or not that particular technology is going to be a contributor to, or a meaningful contributor to getting us out of this. Maybe it will. I hope it will. But in the meantime, there are other solutions, both technological, natural solutions, and sort of hybrids that I think have a lot of potential. And we're going to need to deploy really a portfolio of solutions to remove the quantities of carbon dioxide at the speed at which we need to do it. A Swiss-based company called Climeworks, and they have a plant in Iceland called the Orca plant, and it's a direct air capture plant. So if you picture, this is kind of a crude description, but if you picture gigantic fans sucking air, CO2-filled air, right? And inside of these fans are filters. It filters out the CO2. Clean air comes out the other side. That CO2 is then piped underground and turned into rock, essentially. That's a very basic. I know the scientists out there are all cringing at the simplicity of that explanation.
This is for average people to understand.
Yeah, so that's the basic idea, right? And right now, that plant is pulling between 4,000 and 5,000 tons per year of CO2 out of the atmosphere. Now, that's not nothing, but that's orders of magnitude smaller than what we're ultimately going to need to solve this problem. So again, think about a computer chip. Think about the early Atari video game system versus the PlayStations that we have now, right? Just massive orders of magnitude more processing capability, et cetera. So we might well see that with the development of direct air capture. But right now, it's very expensive. It's coming in at $600 or more per ton. When you're talking about 1 trillion tons of CO2 that need to be removed, do that math, that's a lot of money. I think that cost can come down, but I also think that there are other solutions out there. Synthetic limestone for concrete, massive kelp forests. Kelp is an incredible carbon suck. So there are a lot of things out there that are ultimately going to be able to be scaled up and will contribute to restoring the climate.
A lot of hope being put into kelp. Will kelp help? We'll see. So let's talk about politics just a little bit and get back to the Supreme Court. I mean, clearly, the Republicans who just refuse to act for some reason, I don't know what planet they have reservations on. I don't know what they're going to tell their kids and grandkids, what they did when, the world was trying to get America, just to lead on this, by kicking it down the can and saying, it's up to Congress, when we have a Congress that at least the Republicans, most of them, have shown that they're not willing or capable of acting on climate. So it just seems like BS, frankly. And how damaging is that at a time when, the EPA should be, curbing our emissions? Their ability to regulate is being curbed. It's the exact wrong approach, I would think. And it just, we know that we now have a politicized Supreme Court. That's a big problem. But again, if we don't get, a livable planet, abortion, gun control, none of those things are going to matter much because we're going to be living in a dystopia. And sometimes it feels like we already are beginning to enter that era. I mean, just read the news. My goodness, there's not a day without some kind of climate emergency if one connects the dots.
Yeah, absolutely. And I share that the feelings of disbelief and the feelings of kind of hopelessness and helplessness that we're doomed, we're screwed. But Betsy, that's actually why I wrote that article today in The Hill, was because those feelings ultimately they're not going to get us out of this problem. What we need to do is focus on the solutions, focus on where we can make a difference right now. So we're having a huge problem, clearly, with the federal government, with how Congress is functioning or not functioning, with how the judicial system is overstepping and making very short-sighted and frankly poor decisions. So that's happening on the federal level. Meantime, states still have a lot of power to regulate what happens in their areas of influence. And that's actually where our advocates, the local chapters that are part of the Foundation for Climate Restoration, that's primarily where they're focused right now, is on getting states to do the right thing. And there's plenty to do in terms of emissions reduction, but there's also a lot that they can do in terms of getting these climate restoration solutions, these carbon dioxide removal solutions, to be scaled up and to be ready to stand up and begin operating at scale.
And by focusing on the states, that's not too different from what we are seeing happening with the abortion ruling. States are making decisions independently.
Ultimately, what we see is we can't just stand by and hope that the federal government is going to get their act together in the immediate term. That would just be ignoring recent history to imagine that that's possible. We've got to make sure that it happens ultimately, but in the meantime, we can't just twiddle our thumbs while we hope that happens. We've got to take action where we can, and yeah, right now that is on the state level primarily.
And President Biden just issued an executive order on abortion. I haven't read it yet, but is that something that he can do with this EPA ruling? Can a president overrule the Supreme Court on something of this magnitude?
Well, I don't know that President Biden could specifically overrule the Supreme Court on this specific thing, but there is a lot that the president could do, that the executive branch can do to move forward our climate commitments. Not only to achieve the fairly modest commitments that we've made under the Paris Accords and other agreements like that, but to actually move us to a future that we want to see. The modest commitments that have been made so far are to try to keep warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, to try to prevent the worst from happening. That's not a future that we want. The future that we actually want is a restored climate. That's why we've set that goal as what we're working toward. And there's a lot that the president could do right now to get that in order. They've started, the Department of Energy, for example, is putting more attention and more funding toward carbon dioxide removal solutions. That's a great start, and that's got to continue, and it's got to become more and more of a priority.
So there can be some workarounds for the EPA, it sounds like, but it's just so crazy to hamstring, the Environmental Protection Agency right now. Hamstring, your handicap, really. It's the opposite, as we both agree. Do you think that the EPA, I mean, I don't know how well the EPA was functioning. Actually, I know under Trump, it was not functioning very proactively at all. Do you think that there are enough leaders and critical mass in the EPA that they're going to help with this effort to continue to try to regulate or control emissions, even without, the power that they were supposedly given? Were they using that power? I guess that's the question.
Well, I believe that the vast majority of the people within the EPA are there not because it's a cushy government job, but because they believe that the environment needs and deserves to be protected. And so I do think that they're going to do everything in their power. They're going to get creative to figure out how they can do this. They're going to bring new legal minds in to figure out how they can effectively yet legally circumvent the current hamstringing that was done to them. So I think that is possible. What I would love to see, my dream or my goal for the EPA would be that it not only is focused on how to make things better today, right? Not just how to reduce emissions or eliminate emissions, but also how to create a livable and thrivable environment for future generations.
Absolutely.
That's definitely not within their charter right now. And I think it could be, and I think it should be.
There was a lot of damage done under Scott Pruitt, and that's when we said it was the Environmental Plundering Agency. Has that damage been turned around? Do you know the people that he appointed, whatever? Well, there were like 100 rollbacks, environmental rollbacks under Trump. So to go backwards again is just maddening beyond belief. But I want to move on to what role do you think the fossil fuel companies have in this transition, as well as the utilities? I was moderating a panel in Rome a couple of weeks ago where the river is frighteningly low and it's frighteningly hot, as is in other places and abroad in the States, and it's really only the beginning of summer. And Shell was represented by someone who's in charge of their renewable energy division. And he made it sound like they were really wanting to get out front, on being part of the cleaner, greener energy future. But I just saw today, Shell is drilling, in the Gulf of Mexico like there's no tomorrow, or maybe there will be no tomorrow, like there's no climate change. So is it all greenwashing, what you hear from the big oil companies? Are they actually positioning themselves to really get out front on this? And utilities as well, because I was in a room full of oil and gas executives and coal and utility managers. That's not my usual crowd when I speak. So it was kind of interesting. And I got the feeling they were there grudgingly, not like gung ho. Some were, but mostly it was like, well, we don't have any choice.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately, I think it's more what you just said, that they realize that they don't have any choice. I think that for sure, some of what the oil and gas companies are doing right now to paint themselves as green is greenwashing. But I think that they are the companies and the people that run them they're savvy economically. They recognize that the future of oil, gas, coal is dead. I mean, it's dying out, and there's really no turning back. So I think part of this is, maybe they're trying to squeeze the last drops out of that bad behavior. But I also think that they're recognizing in terms of their corporate lifespan that they've got to figure out a different product to get into that ultimately will last longer, will continue to make their shareholders money back.
And one sign I just saw today that the fossil fuel era is passing is apparently very few students are going into oil development, like at the University of Texas in Austin. So they've looked across the country and seen, it's like the pilot shortage. They're going to have a shortage of people, of young people who want to go into this for any number of reasons you can imagine. So yeah, it does feel like we are turning that corner. But how damaging are the subsidies that are going to the oil companies right now in this moment?
Well, I mean, it's incredibly damaging. Not only in terms of the opportunity cost of what else could we as a society use that money for, right? That alone is incredibly damaging, but also just that this bad behavior that the oil companies have known for decades is bad behavior, right? And they've been covering it up. But this is enabling that. The ongoing subsidies, it's enabling that bad behavior, and it simply cannot continue. It's just unacceptable, and I'm having trouble articulating it because it's so outrageous.
I know. A group of moms and I started a campaign back in 2002 when we invaded Iraq called "Don't Be Fueled," and we were trying to convince soccer moms in their giant SUVs that the safest option for their children, whether it be from asthma or just there was some oil aspect to the invasion, of course, that they were not the safest choice, giant gas guzzlers. And here we are, 20 years later. And the one silver green lining, as I say, is people who got really upset about the high gas prices. There's more people than ever looking into EVs, which is as it should be. Then we got to green the grid, but I'm getting astray here. I could talk to you all day. Yeah, do you see an end to the subsidies? Is that on the horizon, or is it just like, pipe dream, oil pipeline?
Yeah, gosh, I don't have a good answer to that. My intuition would say it's going to be a while yet. To go back again to the dysfunction of our federal government and who's making the decisions and how many of them get into the room to make a decision is through oil money to begin with, and so that cycle is self-perpetuating, and it's going to take a while to undo that, I think. And so again, we've got to figure out creative ways around that, because whether or not fossil fuel subsidies continue, we've got to figure out a way out of this, and so we can do that by continuing to pressure our elected officials at all levels of government to do the right thing, to implement procurement policies that will use low carbon or carbon negative concrete, for example. Right, there are a number of things that we can do in the meantime while that is being undone. And I'll mention there are a lot of people working very hard to make sure that it happens as quickly as possible.
And one of the things people can do is vote.
Absolutely, yeah.
But candidates who understand climate science to begin with.
Yeah, voting is essential, and I think that it's never been clearer than it is now just how important that is.
Yeah. Well, we can hope there's a backlash to all the Supreme Court rulings that really went against the majority of the American people on abortion, on guns, and climate. So, I mean, it's crazy to think that there's anybody who wants more climate change, so it's got to all be tied to the fossil fuel industry. And what else can people do if they're concerned?
Well, what I encourage people to do is learn more about the large-scale solutions to climate change. Right? It's very important to pay attention to how to reduce emissions, both in your personal life, your own carbon footprint, as well as our society at large. But we've also got to pay very close attention to what are the things out there that can actually solve the problem and not only prevent the worst from happening, but restore the climate to the best of our ability. So learning more on our website, f4cr.org, f4cr.org. We've got a new educational initiative called the Solution Series, where from month to month, we're highlighting a particular carbon dioxide removal solution and doing a deep dive into that. So that's been really exciting to learn more. And we've got a few more episodes of that coming out over the next few months. So I would encourage people to check that out. I alluded earlier to our local chapter advocates who are working mostly at the state level, the local level, a little bit at the national level as well. Getting involved in a local chapter that already exists, or take a step out there, be bold, be brave, take action, start one in your community. Betsy, the last thing I want to mention is our youth leaders for climate restoration. This is a training program for young people aged 13 to 24. We've got participants all around the world who are coming together to train one another on how to speak effectively about climate restoration, how to take action, and opening up opportunities, innovating together. So it's a really exciting program, a lot of energy behind that. And so for all the young people and for any of the listeners who have young people in their lives, I'd encourage you to check that out as well.
As you do. I can hear those young people in the background. How many children do you have?
Well, I have one of my own. And Betsy, I got to say, that's what I do this work for, is for my daughter, for future generations, but also, to be perfectly honest, I'm doing it for myself, for my generation as well. The environment is something that I'm experiencing, and I certainly hope that I'm around on Earth for a lot longer. So I want that. I wanted a livable environment for myself, for my daughter's generation, and for many, many, many generations to come. So that's the real motivation for this work.
My daughter's a little bit older. She's getting married in October, and she and her fiance certainly are hoping and planning to start a family. And knowing what I know, I have such mixed feelings imagining that. And I'm angry, that that's changed in the last 10 years. Certainly when I had her 27 years ago, this was not a concern. I mean, the environment, pollution, but not, ecological collapse.
Yeah, definitely. And that's all the more reason that we've got to not only take action, but take relentless action. Yes. And we have no choice but to be successful.
Thank you, Rick Wayman. I really appreciate your being with us, and I love your article. We'll put a link on our website, and I want to invite our viewers to please go to our YouTube channel if you're not there already, and subscribe. We're about halfway to our goal of getting to 1,000 subscribers. There's no spam. You just get notified when I put up a new interview, which happens a couple of times a week. Our editor, Christine Weiss, puts them up. And we're just new. And please spread the word, Rick, because we don't have any marketing budget or advertising agency. We just know that we're filling a green gap in news, that the news channels just are not filling. They've gotten better, but they're not talking about it nearly enough. Like you said, not relentlessly, but we're relentless. So thanks for being part of Green TV.
Betsy, thanks so much for the opportunity. I'm thrilled to be in the early days of Green TV, and thanks to all the viewers out there. Keep it up, keep your spirits up, and let's get this done together.
Thank you. It's really good to know you're out there. I had not heard of your organization before today, so that's what writing an article can do. I'm really glad to know about you, and perhaps we can find some way to work together, since we are 100% focused on solutions, climate, but also oceans and extinction and all those related issues that are not small either.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to collaborating, Betsy. Thank you.
God help us, right? God bless us. God help us. Bye-bye.
All right.